The stars looked different from the bridge of the UES horizon, as Captain Jake Morrison stared out into the black void of space. 3 years had passed since Earth launched its first deep space exploration mission, and Jake still felt amazed every time he saw the endless field of distant suns. The ship hummed quietly around him while his crew worked at their stations preparing for another day of mapping. Unknown star systems. Lisa Carter sat at the pilot controls checking the navigation systems for the 3rd time that morning. Her fingers moved across the holographic displays with practiced ease as she plotted their course through the Kepler 4042 system. The young pilot had been with Jake since the beginning of the mission and had proven herself to be one of the best navigators Earth had ever produced. Ben Rodriguez looked up from his communication station and called out to the captain. The dark-haired officer had been monitoring radio frequencies all morning, hoping to pick up some sign of intelligent life, but so far had found nothing except cosmic background radiation and solar interference. Dr. Amy Foster worked quietly at her science station analyzing samples they had collected from the 3rd planet in the system. The xenobiologist had dedicated her entire career to the search for alien life, and this mission represented everything she had dreamed of since childhood. Her instruments showed promising signs of organic compounds in the planet atmosphere, but nothing that clearly indicated advanced civilization. Chief Engineer Ryan Phillips emerged from the lower decks, wiping grease from his hands with an old cloth. The veteran engineer had served on 3 different spacecraft before joining the Horizon crew, and his experience with experimental drives had saved them more than once during their long journey. He walked over to Jake and reported that the new jump drive was functioning perfectly and ready for emergency use if needed. The Horizon had been traveling for 6 months, through unexplored regions of space, mapping planets and searching for signs of intelligent life. Earth's government had equipped them with the most advanced technology available, including experimental, faster-than-light communication systems and defensive shields. However, they were strictly a science vessel with minimal weapons since humanity expected any first contact to be peaceful. Jake was reviewing the daily reports when Lisa suddenly called out from her station. Her voice carried excitement and concern as she reported multiple large objects approaching their position at high speed. The captain immediately ordered all crew to battle stations, even though they had never encountered anything more dangerous than space debris. Ben worked frantically at his controls, trying to establish communication with the approaching vessels. His equipment detected powerful energy signatures unlike anything in Earth's databases, and the ships appeared to be using technology far beyond human understanding. He sent out standard greeting messages in dozens of languages but received no response. Dr. Foster focused her sensors on the alien vessels and gasped at what she saw. The ships were massive constructs of metal and energy that seemed to bend space around them as they moved. Their design showed clear signs of advanced engineering, with weapons systems that made human technology look primitive by comparison. Ryan ran back to the engine room to prepare the experimental jump drive for emergency activation. The untested system had only been used once during trials, and the engineers back on Earth weren't completely sure it would work properly under combat conditions. He began the startup sequence, knowing that their lives might depend on technology that existed only in theory. The alien fleet consisted of 12 vessels arranged in perfect formation as they approached the human ship. Their hulls gleamed with strange metals that reflected starlight in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Energy weapons charged with visible power, while shield generators created distortion fields around each vessel. Fleet Commander Vextar stood on the bridge of his flagship studying the primitive vessel that had dared to enter Zephyrian space without permission. The alien commander was tall and muscular with gray skin and forearms that ended in clawed hands. His species had conquered 47 star systems through superior technology and ruthless military tactics. The Zephyrians had built their empire on the principle that might made right, and any species they encountered either submitted immediately or faced complete destruction. They viewed diplomacy as weakness and had never met a race that could stand against their advanced weaponry. Vextar ordered his weapons officer to prepare for immediate attack. Jake tried one more time to establish peaceful contact with the alien fleet, but his communications officer reported that all frequencies remained silent. The captain knew that they were completely outgunned and outnumbered, but protocol required him to attempt diplomatic solutions before considering retreat. He ordered Ben to transmit universal peace symbols and mathematical sequences that might indicate peaceful intent. Dr. Foster detected massive energy buildups in the alien weapon systems and shouted a warning to the bridge crew. Her instruments showed that the vessels were preparing to fire weapons with power levels that could destroy their ship with a single hit. She recommended immediate evacuation to escape pods, but Jake refused to abandon his vessel without trying every option. The first alien energy blast struck the Horizon's forward shields and sent shockwaves through the entire vessel. Emergency lights activated throughout the ship as primary power systems overloaded from the massive energy discharge. Lisa fought to maintain control as the ship spun wildly through space while more enemy fire poured into their position. Ryan's voice came over the ship's communication system announcing that the jump drive was ready for activation, but warned that using untested technology during combat could result in catastrophic failure. Jake made the decision to risk everything on the experimental system, rather than face certain death from continued alien attack. Ben sent out a final desperate message toward Earth warning about the hostile alien contact before another energy blast destroyed his communication array. The young officer was thrown from his station as the ship's hull began to buckle under the relentless alien assault. Emergency bulkheads sealed automatically to prevent atmosphere loss. Dr. Foster grabbed her research data and ran toward the escape pods, knowing that her scientific discoveries about alien life might be humanity's only warning about the threat they now faced. She could hear the ship's structure groaning under stress as more enemy weapons found their target. Jake gave the order to activate the jump drive just as another massive energy blast tore through the ship's engineering section. Ryan Phillips was caught in the explosion and died instantly as plasma fires spread through the lower decks. The experimental drive engaged with a blinding flash of light that sent the damaged Horizon racing through space toward home. The surviving crew members watched helplessly as 3 more of their friends died from injuries sustained during the attack. Lisa managed to maintain enough control to keep them on course toward Earth, while Jake and the others tried to save everyone they could. The alien fleet made no attempt to follow them, but the damage had been done. Hours later, as the wounded Horizon limped toward human space, Jake realized that everything had changed. Humanity was no longer alone in the universe, and their first contact had been an act of unprovoked war. He knew that Earth needed to be warned about the hostile aliens and prepared for the possibility that they might return with even greater force. The Great Council Chamber on Centauri Prime stretched out like a vast cathedral with crystalline walls that caught and reflected light from 12 different suns. Ambassador Helen Cooper walked slowly across the polished floor toward the center platform where representatives from across the galaxy had gathered for humanity's first official contact with the galactic community. Her black diplomatic uniform felt heavy against her shoulders as she carried the weight of representing her entire species. 6 months had passed since the Horizons returned to Earth with news of the hostile alien attack. The surviving crew members had spent weeks debriefing with military officials and scientists who struggled to understand the advanced technology they had witnessed. Captain Jake Morrison had been promoted and now commanded Earth's hastily assembled defense fleet, while the government prepared for the possibility of future alien contact. Helen had been chosen as Earth's first galactic ambassador because of her years of experience in international diplomacy and her ability to remain calm under pressure. She had studied every piece of information available about alien cultures and had practiced her presentation countless times before making the long journey to the neutral world where the Galactic Council met. The council chamber contained representatives from 12 different alien species arranged in a perfect circle around the central platform. Each delegation sat behind curved desks made from materials that seemed to shift and change color as Helen watched. The technology on display made even Earth's most advanced computers look like primitive calculating machines. Elder Counselor Threndok of the Zephyrian Empire sat directly across from where Helen would make her presentation. The gray-skinned alien commander wore elaborate ceremonial armor decorated with symbols of his many military victories. His forearms moved constantly as he reviewed documents on floating holographic displays while his cold eyes studied the human ambassador with obvious disdain. The peaceful Andromedans occupied the section to Helen's left with their tall, graceful forms and luminescent skin that pulsed gently with inner light. Their leader was an ancient female named Cathara, who had served on the council for over 2 centuries and had witnessed the rise and fall of dozens of different civilizations. Her large eyes showed wisdom and sadness as she watched the proceedings. Representatives from the logical Tauri species sat perfectly still behind their section of the council chamber. These beings looked almost human except for their enlarged heads and silver-colored skin that reflected light like polished metal. They communicated through direct mental contact and rarely spoke aloud during council sessions, preferring to observe and analyze. Everything they witnessed, Helen stepped onto the central platform and activated her translation device, which would convert her words into the dozen different languages spoken by the council members. She began her presentation by thanking the council for allowing humanity to address them and expressing hope that this meeting would lead to peaceful relations between Earth and the galactic community. The human ambassador presented evidence of the unprovoked Zephyrian attack on the exploration vessel Horizon, including recorded data from the ship's sensors and testimony from the surviving crew members. She displayed holographic images of the damaged vessel and played audio recordings of their attempts to establish peaceful communication before the aliens opened fire without warning. Elder Counselor Threndock rose from his seat, with his forearms spread wide in a gesture of dismissal. His voice carried across the chamber as he claimed that humans had fired first and branded them as aggressive expansionists who posed a threat to galactic peace. He presented his own version of events, which portrayed the Zephyrian fleet as innocent victims defending themselves against human aggression. The other council members listened to both presentations, but Helen could see that most of them were intimidated by Zephyrian military power and unwilling to challenge the Empire's version of events. Species after species voted to accept the Zephyrian account, and some even suggested that trade sanctions should be placed on human space to prevent future incidents. Helen tried to present additional evidence, including detailed sensor logs that clearly showed the Zephyrian vessels charging weapons before any human response, but the Council refused to consider her documentation. The vote was 10-2 in favor of the Zephyrians, with only the Andromedans and one other species supporting humanity's position. As the formal session ended, Helen felt the crushing weight of failure settling over her shoulders. Humanity had hoped for justice, and instead found themselves branded as aggressors by a galactic community that seemed more interested in maintaining peace with powerful military forces than seeking truth. She gathered her materials and prepared to leave the chamber, knowing that Earth would receive no help from the galaxy. Cathara approached Helen quietly as the other delegates filed out of the council chamber. The ancient Andromedan moved with fluid grace despite her advanced age, and her luminescent skin pulsed with patterns that Helen had learned indicated deep concern. She spoke in whispered tones that her translation device could barely detect. The elderly diplomat revealed that the Zephyrians were planning a full-scale invasion of human space within the next few months. She explained that the Empire had used similar tactics against 3 other species in recent decades, and all of those civilizations had been completely wiped out when they tried to resist Zephyrian expansion. The attacks always followed the same pattern, with diplomatic incidents leading to military conquest. Cathara shared something else that made Helen's blood run cold with fear and excitement. Ancient Andromedan records spoke of a species that had once defeated the Zephyrians in a great war that happened thousands of years before most current civilizations had achieved spaceflight. The records were incomplete and damaged, but they described warriors who fought without honor and used tactics that the Zephyrians could not counter. The Andromedan elder explained that these ancient warriors had called themselves Terrans and had possessed technology that could destroy entire Zephyrian fleets through unconventional warfare and superior strategy. However, the Terrans had mysteriously disappeared from galactic history, leaving behind only fragments of information and rumors of their incredible military abilities. Helen listened with growing amazement as Cathara described how the ancient Terrans had refused to follow traditional rules of warfare and instead used surprise attacks, psychological manipulation, and weapons that struck from impossible distances. The Zephyrians had eventually retreated from Terran space and had spent centuries trying to forget their humiliating defeat at the hands of beings they considered inferior. The connection between the ancient Terrans and modern humans seemed impossible, but Cathara insisted that the genetic markers and cultural patterns were too similar to be coincidental. She believed that humans were either descendants of the legendary Terrans or possibly the same species that had somehow lost their advanced technology and forgotten their warrior heritage. As Helen prepared to return to Earth with this incredible information, Cathara provided her with copies of the ancient records that had been carefully preserved in Andromedan archives for thousands of years. The documents were fragmentary and written in languages that no longer existed, but they contained technical specifications and tactical descriptions that might help humanity prepare for the coming war. Helen's ship departed from Centauri, Prime carrying the most important cargo in human history as she raced back to Earth, with warning of the Zephyrian invasion and evidence of humanity's possible connection to an ancient warrior race. She knew that every day of delay could mean the difference between survival and extinction for her species. The journey home gave Helen time to study the Andromedan records, and what she found filled her with both hope and terror. The ancient Terrans had indeed possessed incredible military capabilities, but they had also paid a terrible price for their victories. The records suggested that their entire civilization had been transformed into a war machine that eventually consumed itself in endless conflict. As Earth appeared in her ship's view screen, Helen wondered if humanity would be forced to follow the same path as their ancient ancestors. The choice seemed simple enough between becoming warriors or facing extinction, but she knew that the decision would change human civilization forever. The galaxy had rejected their pleas for peace, and now they would learn what humans could become when pushed beyond all reasonable limits. Helen's transmission to Earth's government carried a simple message that would echo through history. The aliens had made their choice, and now humanity would make theirs. War was coming whether they wanted it or not, and the only question remaining was whether humans still possessed the warrior spirit that had once made the entire galaxy tremble with fear. President Maria Santos stood before the massive display screen in the Emergency Command Center deep beneath the Capitol building as reports flooded in from every corner of human space. The news from Ambassador Cooper had reached Earth 3 days. Ego and every government on the planet was now working together with desperate intensity to prepare for an alien invasion that could arrive at any moment. General Chris Barnes pointed at the tactical display showing the current positions of all human military assets scattered across 12 different star systems. The grizzled veteran had spent 40 years preparing for conventional warfare against human enemies and now found himself planning defense against aliens with technology that made his best weapons look like primitive clubs and stones. Admiral Nicole Hayes studied the reports from her Naval Intelligence Division, which had been analyzing every piece of data recovered from the damaged horizon. Her staff had worked around the clock to understand Zephyrian weapons technology, and the results were not encouraging. Human ships would be outgunned by ratios of 10 to 1 or worse in any direct confrontation. Dr. Peter Walsh entered the command center carrying a briefcase filled with classified documents detailing humanity's most advanced experimental weapons programs. The head of Earth's Weapons Research Division had been given unlimited resources and authority to develop anything that might give human forces an advantage against superior alien technology. The scientist opened his briefcase and spread technical diagrams across the conference table showing designs for plasma cannons that could cut through alien hull materials and kinetic bombardment systems that fired projectiles at significant fractions of light speed. Most promising were the AI-controlled fighter drones that could operate in swarms and overwhelm enemy targeting systems through sheer numbers. President Santos listened as each expert presented their assessment of humanity's chances in the coming war. The consensus was grim, but not hopeless if they could avoid fighting the aliens according to conventional military doctrine. Human forces would need to use tactics that their enemies could not predict or counter, using hit-and-run attacks that struck from unexpected directions. General Barnes proposed converting every available civilian spacecraft into makeshift warships using whatever weapons could be mounted on their hulls. The plan would give humanity hundreds of vessels instead of the few dozen military ships currently available, but most would be crewed by civilians with minimal combat training and equipped with improvised weapon systems. Admiral Hayes suggested a different approach focused on making the cost of conquering human space so high that even victory would be Pyrrhic for the aliens. Her strategy involved turning every human world into a fortress where civilian populations would fight guerrilla campaigns that could continue for years, even after formal military resistance ended. Dr. Walsh explained that his experimental weapons were designed to exploit the one advantage humans possessed over their alien enemies. Zephyrian technology was clearly superior, but it was also predictable and followed logical patterns that could be analyzed and countered. Human unpredictability and willingness to take desperate risks might be enough to level the playing field. The president authorized immediate implementation of all three strategies, knowing that humanity's survival depended on being ready for war within weeks rather than months. Every resource on Earth was redirected toward military production, while colonists throughout human space began preparing defensive positions on their home worlds. Captain Jake Morrison arrived at the orbital shipyards above Earth where he would oversee construction of humanity's first true battle fleet. The promotion to admiral had come with responsibility for converting peaceful exploration vessels into instruments of war. He worked alongside engineer Kate Sullivan, who had designed modular weapon systems that could be installed on almost any spacecraft. The shipyards buzzed with activity as thousands of workers labored around the clock to retrofit civilian vessels with armor plating and weapons mountings. Cargo haulers became missile boats, while passenger liners were converted into troop transports. Even small personal craft received basic armaments and communication systems that would allow them to serve as scouts or suicide attack vessels. Lieutenant Colonel Eric Thompson led the ground forces training program that was turning ordinary colonists into guerrilla fighters capable of making any alien occupation a nightmare of constant resistance. His instructors taught tactics borrowed from every successful resistance movement in human history, showing civilians how to use their knowledge of local terrain against technologically superior enemies. The training camps established on dozens of worlds focused on teaching colonists to fight without honor or mercy, using whatever weapons and tactics would be most effective against alien occupiers. Thompson's soldiers learned to build improvised explosives from common materials and to turn innocent-looking structures into deadly traps for unwary enemies. Communication networks were established between all human worlds using quantum entanglement, transmitters that the aliens could not detect or intercept. The system would allow resistance cells to coordinate their activities even after normal communication channels were destroyed during the initial invasion. Every human settlement became a potential base for continuing the fight. Food and medical supplies were stockpiled in hidden locations throughout human space, while weapons manufacturing was distributed among hundreds of small facilities that could continue producing arms even under alien occupation. The entire human economy was transformed into a war machine, designed to support prolonged resistance against overwhelming odds. Children as young as 12 received basic military training, while their parents learned to operate the experimental weapons that Dr. Walsh's teams were producing in underground factories. The message was clear that every human, regardless of age or occupation, would be expected to contribute to the war effort when the aliens arrived. Admiral Morrison visited the ancient Andromedan records that Ambassador Cooper had brought back from Centauri Prime and found tactical information that seemed almost too good to be true. The legendary Terrans had indeed used many of the same strategies that human military planners were now developing, including swarm attacks by small vessels and guerrilla warfare that wore down superior enemies through attrition. The historical documents described weapons that fired solid projectiles at relativistic speeds and defensive tactics that used planetary environments to neutralize technological advantages. Most encouraging were accounts of Terran psychological warfare that had broken the morale of entire Zephyrian fleets without requiring direct military confrontation. Dr. Walsh's research teams worked frantically to reverse engineer ancient Terran weapons described in the Andromedan records, while his AI specialists developed autonomous combat systems that could operate independently when human crews were killed or captured. The experimental drones showed remarkable promise in combat simulations where they overwhelmed conventional defenses through coordinated mass attacks. President Santos addressed the human population in a broadcast that was transmitted to every world and ship in human space. She explained that war was coming whether they wanted it or not, and that survival would require every person to become a soldier willing to fight and die for the continued existence of their species. The president's speech contained a simple message that resonated throughout human space. The aliens had chosen to see humanity as weak and primitive, but they would soon learn that humans possessed something their advanced technology could not replicate. When pushed beyond all reasonable limits, people became capable of acts that defied logic and overcome impossible odds through sheer determination. Training exercises conducted throughout human space showed promising results as civilian crews learned to operate their improvised warships, and colonists mastered guerrilla tactics that would make alien occupation costly and dangerous. The transformation of human society from peaceful exploration to total war had taken less than 2 months and showed what people could accomplish when faced with extinction. Admiral Morrison received reports that alien scouts had been detected at the edge of human space, conducting reconnaissance missions in preparation for the main invasion force. The time for preparation was running out, but humanity was as ready as they could be given the circumstances. Soon they would discover whether the spirit of the ancient Terrans still lived in their descendants. The final preparations included distributing copies of the Andromedan records to every military unit and resistance cell, so that the tactical knowledge of their ancestors would survive even if communication networks failed during the invasion. Human civilization had been transformed into something their enemies would not recognize or understand when the war finally began. War leader Krashun stood on the command bridge of his massive flagship as the Zephyrian invasion fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system. 200 of the Empire's finest warships spread out in perfect formation while their crews prepared for what should be an easy victory against the primitive humans who had dared to resist Zephyrian authority. The alien commander studied tactical displays showing the positions of human defensive forces gathered near Jupiter's moons and felt contempt for the pathetic fleet that Earth had assembled to oppose him. 50 makeshift vessels crewed by inexperienced civilians could not possibly stand against the technological might of the Zephyrian Empire that had conquered 47 star systems through superior firepower and disciplined military tactics. Admiral Jake Morrison watched from the bridge of his command ship as alien vessels began their approach toward the inner system. The human defense fleet looked pitiful compared to the massive alien warships, but Jake knew that appearances could be deceiving. His crews had spent months preparing for this moment, and every captain understood their role in the desperate plan that represented humanity's only hope for survival. The first phase of the battle began when human scout ships raced toward the alien fleet at maximum acceleration, while broadcasting surrender messages that were designed to confuse enemy commanders about human intentions. Captain Danny Martinez led a squadron of converted civilian craft that appeared to be attempting escape, but were actually positioning themselves for coordinated attacks on specific alien vessels. Krashun ordered his weapons officers to destroy the approaching human ships, but was surprised when several of them exploded before his weapons could target them. The alien commander realized too late that the humans were using suicide attacks with automated vessels packed with explosives and guided by artificial intelligence systems that could not be deterred by conventional defensive measures. The explosion of the first human kamikaze ship damaged 3 Zephyrian vessels and sent shockwaves through the alien fleet as commanders tried to understand tactics that violated every principle of civilized warfare. No species in galactic history had ever used automated suicide attacks because such weapons were considered barbaric and dishonorable by military standards. Admiral Morrison smiled grimly as he watched the alien formation begin to break apart. Under the pressure of unpredictable human attacks that struck from multiple directions simultaneously, his crews launched waves of small fighter craft that swarmed around the massive alien ships like angry insects, while firing kinetic projectiles that penetrated energy shields through pure momentum rather than sophisticated technology. Dr. Walsh's experimental weapons proved devastatingly effective as human ships fired solid tungsten rods at significant fractions of light speed directly into the hulls of alien vessels. The Zephyrian energy shields had been designed to deflect energy weapons, but could not stop physical projectiles that struck with the force of nuclear explosions and tore through their advanced armor like paper. Captain Martinez led his fighter squadron in hit-and-run attacks that targeted the sensor arrays and weapon systems of individual alien ships while avoiding direct confrontation with their main firepower. The human pilots used erratic flight patterns that made targeting impossible for automated alien defense systems designed to counter logical attack approaches. Krashun watched in growing horror as his disciplined fleet was torn apart by chaotic human tactics that seemed to have no pattern or strategic purpose. His weapons officers reported that they could not maintain target locks on human vessels that changed direction randomly and used their own destroyed ships as cover for continued attacks. The battle near Jupiter's moons became a nightmare of confusion for the Zephyrian forces as human ships appeared from behind asteroids and space debris to launch surprise attacks before disappearing again into the cosmic background. The aliens found themselves fighting an enemy that refused to engage in conventional battle and instead struck like ghosts from unexpected angles. Human losses were heavy as alien weapons destroyed ship after ship, but Admiral Morrison had anticipated massive casualties and planned accordingly. For every human vessel lost, 2 more appeared to take its place while automated systems continued fighting, even after their crews were killed. The psychological impact on alien forces was devastating as they realized they were fighting an enemy that would not surrender or retreat. Meanwhile, on Mars colony, the first alien ground forces encountered Lieutenant Colonel Eric Thompson's defenders, who had spent months preparing the Red Planet's terrain for guerrilla warfare. The Zephyrian troops expected to face conventional military units and instead found themselves fighting an invisible enemy that struck from dust storms and underground tunnels. The aliens discovered that humans did not fight with honor or follow accepted rules of warfare, but instead used every dirty trick and psychological weapon at their disposal. Booby traps made from mining equipment killed Zephyrian soldiers while recorded human voices played disturbing sounds that disrupted alien concentration and morale. Colonel Thompson's forces used the Red Planet's unique environment to their advantage by timing attacks during dust storms that reduced visibility to 0 and made alien sensors useless. Human fighters wearing primitive protective gear could operate in conditions that disabled sophisticated Zephyrian equipment and turned their technological advantages into liabilities. The ground war on Mars became a series of ambushes and hit-and-run attacks that wore down alien forces through constant harassment rather than direct confrontation. Human defenders appeared from nowhere to strike at alien supply lines before vanishing back into the maze of canyons and underground facilities that they knew better than their enemies. Back in space, the battle continued as human AI-controlled drones swarmed around alien vessels in patterns that seemed random, but were actually coordinated by quantum computers that calculated optimal attack vectors faster than biological brains could process. The mechanical fighters showed no fear or hesitation as they rammed themselves into alien ships or delivered payloads of experimental weapons. Admiral Morrison ordered the next phase of his plan as human ships began ramming attacks against the largest alien vessels using their experimental jump drives to appear directly inside enemy shield perimeters. The suicide attacks were devastating because Zephyrian defenses had never been designed to counter enemies that could teleport past their protective barriers. Krashun tried desperately to reorganize his remaining forces, but found that human attacks had destroyed his communication networks and isolated his ships from central command. Individual alien captains were forced to make tactical decisions without coordination, while facing an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move and counter it with something completely unexpected. The turning point came when human forces successfully destroyed the alien command ship carrying war leader Krashun, using a coordinated attack by dozens of small vessels that overwhelmed its defenses through sheer numbers. The death of their commander sent shockwaves through the Zephyrian fleet as junior officers struggled to maintain discipline while facing continued human assaults. Dr. Walsh's kinetic bombardment systems proved their worth as human ships fired projectiles at relativistic speeds that could not be intercepted or deflected by any known technology. The solid metal rods struck alien vessels with enough energy to vaporize entire sections and left the survivors wondering how primitive humans had developed weapons that could penetrate their most advanced defenses. The space battle raged for 18 hours as human forces continued their relentless attacks against the demoralized alien fleet. Ships that tried to retreat found themselves pursued by swarms of human fighters that showed no mercy and gave no quarter, while vessels that attempted to surrender were ignored as human forces pressed their advantage. Captain Martinez reported that his squadron had successfully disabled the main Zephyrian supply depot, using improvised explosives smuggled aboard alien ships by human infiltrators who had pretended to be prisoners. The destruction of their logistical support left the remaining alien forces without ammunition or replacement parts for their damaged vessels. As the battle entered its final phase, Admiral Morrison watched alien ships beginning to flee the system, in disorder while human forces continued harassing their retreat. The cost had been enormous, with over half the human fleet destroyed and thousands of brave crew members dead. But they had accomplished something that no species in galactic history had managed since the ancient Terrans disappeared thousands of years ago. 3 months after the invasion began, the surviving ships of the Zephyrian fleet limped away from human space, carrying news of their devastating defeat back to the Empire that had never before tasted failure on such a massive scale. The proud, alien warriors who had conquered dozens of star systems found themselves broken by an enemy they had dismissed as primitive and weak. The remnants of war leader Krasun's once mighty fleet carried only 30 vessels out of the 200 that had entered the Sol system with such confidence. 80% of the Zephyrian invasion force had been destroyed by human tactics that violated every accepted principle of civilized warfare, and left the survivors questioning everything they believed about military superiority and technological advancement. Admiral Jake Morrison stood in the command center on Earth, reviewing casualty reports from the 3-month war that had transformed human civilization forever. The cost had been enormous, with entire colonies devastated and millions of people dead, but humanity had survived and proven that they could stand against any threat the galaxy might send against them. Video recordings of the conflict began spreading throughout galactic civilization as traders and neutral observers shared footage of disciplined alien armies being torn apart by seemingly chaotic human forces that fought with tactics no civilized species would consider using. The images shocked alien populations who had believed that technological superiority guaranteed victory in any military confrontation. Ambassador Helen Cooper received an urgent communication from Centauri Prime requesting that humanity send representatives to an emergency session of the Galactic Council. The tone of the message was very different from the dismissive attitude she had encountered during her first visit, and suggested that the galaxy's perspective on human capabilities had undergone a dramatic change. The journey back to the Council, Chambers gave Helen time to review reports from human intelligence agents who had been monitoring alien communications throughout the war. The intercepts revealed that panic was spreading through several star systems, as alien governments realized that humanity possessed military capabilities that had not been seen since the legendary Terrans disappeared from galactic history. Helen arrived at Centauri Prime accompanied by Admiral Morrison and General Chris Barnes, who wore their military uniforms as a clear reminder that humanity was no longer a species that could be safely ignored or dismissed. The trio carried themselves with quiet confidence as they entered the council chamber where 12 alien species waited to hear what terms the humans would demand. The atmosphere in the council chamber was completely different from Helen's first visit, as alien representatives who had previously shown contempt for humanity now watched the human delegation with obvious respect and fear. Even Elder Counselor Threndok of the Zephyrian Empire sat quietly with his forearms folded in a gesture of submission rather than defiance. Helen began her presentation by displaying footage from the recent war showing human forces destroying Zephyrian vessels using tactics that the aliens could not counter or understand. She made it clear that humanity had not sought this conflict, but had proven they could defend themselves against any threat the galaxy might present. The human ambassador presented her government's terms for peace, which included recognition of humanity as a sovereign species with equal rights in galactic affairs, substantial reparations for the unprovoked attack that had started the war, and the establishment of human colonies as neutral zones where other species could not interfere without permission. Admiral Morrison stepped forward to address the military aspects of humanity's demands, including the right to maintain defensive fleets in human space and to develop whatever weapons technology they deemed necessary for their protection. He made it clear that any future attacks on human interests would result in retaliation that would make the recent conflict look like a minor border skirmish. General Barnes presented evidence that human ground forces had successfully resisted alien occupation using guerrilla tactics that could be implemented on any world throughout the galaxy. He suggested that other species might benefit from learning these defensive techniques but warned that humanity would not hesitate to use them against anyone who threatened human civilians. The ancient Andromedan diplomat Cathara rose slowly from her seat and addressed the council with words that sent shockwaves throughout the chamber. She revealed that her people's archives contained complete records proving that humans were, indeed, descendants of the legendary Terrans who had once humbled the Zephyrian Empire thousands of years earlier. The elderly alien explained that the Terrans had been the most feared warriors in galactic history, before mysteriously disappearing into the Outer Rim regions, where they had apparently established colonies that eventually became modern human civilization. The genetic markers and cultural patterns were identical, and the military tactics used in the recent war matched ancient descriptions of Terran warfare. Cathara presented holographic displays of ancient documents that described Terran victories against overwhelming odds using unconventional tactics and experimental weapons that struck fear into the hearts of their enemies. The record showed that every species in the galaxy had once lived in terror of Terran expansion before their sudden withdrawal from galactic affairs. The revelation that humanity represented the return of the legendary Terrans transformed the council session as alien representatives realized they were dealing with descendants of the most successful military force in galactic history. Fear replaced contempt as species after species voted to accept human demands, rather than risk further conflict with beings whose ancestors had once ruled the stars. Elder Counselor Threndok formally apologized for the Zephyrian attack and agreed to pay massive reparations while acknowledging human sovereignty over their claimed territories. The proud alien warrior admitted that his people had made a terrible mistake in underestimating human capabilities, and promised that the Empire would respect human borders in future. The Council voted unanimously to grant humanity full membership in galactic civilization with all the rights and privileges that came with that status. Trade agreements were negotiated that would give human colonies access to advanced alien technology in exchange for sharing certain human innovations that had proven effective during the recent war. As the formal session ended, Helen received a private communication from Captain Lisa Carter, who had been exploring the Outer Rim regions in a newly constructed exploration vessel. The message contained amazing news that changed everything humanity thought they knew about their place in the galaxy. Lisa reported that her ship had detected signals from other human colonies that had been established thousands of years earlier by the original Terran Exodus. These lost settlements had continued developing independently and now possessed technology that made even current human achievements look primitive by comparison. The discovery meant that humanity was not alone in the galaxy, but was actually part of a vast network of human civilizations that had been separated by time and distance. The prospect of reuniting with their long-lost cousins filled Helen with excitement, as she realized that the recent war had been only the beginning of humanity's return to galactic prominence. Admiral Morrison received authorization to begin construction of a new class of exploration vessels designed to make contact with the lost human colonies and establish communication networks that would span the entire galaxy. The project represented the largest undertaking in human history and would require resources from every world in human space. General Barnes started planning defensive strategies that would protect the growing human territories from any species that might attempt to interfere with their expansion. The lessons learned during the Zephyrian invasion would be applied on a galactic scale, as humanity prepared to reclaim their ancestral position among the stars. As Helen prepared for the journey back to Earth, she reflected on how much had changed. Since the Horizon's first encounter with hostile aliens, humanity had been forced to rediscover their warrior heritage, but had emerged stronger and more united than ever before in their history. The final entry in the Galactic Council's updated database contained a simple warning that would be transmitted to every species throughout known space. The entry read, Species Classification, Human. Threat Level, Maximum. Recommendation, Avoid all hostile contact. Historical note, they do not fight with honor, they fight to win. Captain Lisa Carter's ship set course for the coordinates of the EO, nearest lost human colony, as humanity began the long process of reuniting with their scattered people and reclaiming their place as the galaxy's dominant species. The age of human expansion had begun again, and this time there would be no mysterious disappearance into the Outer Rim. The stars that had once seemed so distant and foreign now beckoned as highways leading home to civilizations that had never forgotten their Terran heritage. Humanity's long exile was ending, and the galaxy would never be the same again.